This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hey guys, Jay here. Welcome to Models Memories Weekly, episode 185. Models Memories is a show about nothing and is filmed in front of a live studio audience. This is a show where I talk about painting, modeling, and working experiences from the week. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Jay, you put out 3 videos a week. Ow! Could I possibly have more to say? Well, I do, and here goes. This week, Games Workshop knocked all of our socks off with a brand new painting palette, and I took a little look-see at the orcs because it is, of course, the month of Orktober, and I've been feeling the orcs. But first, have you ever noticed that all spaces online seem to be made up of squares? Well, today's sponsor, Squarespace, can help with that. Squarespace allows anyone to design the website of their dreams with the most powerful and easiest design tools in the industry, like Design Intelligence. Using AI technology empowers anyone to build a more personalized website tailored to their needs, crafting a bespoke digital identity. Choose from a professionally curated selection of styling options to build a unique online presence from the ground up. Squarespace makes sure it's easy to launch your website and get discovered fast with integrated optimized SEO tools so you show up more often to more people and grow the way you want. With Squarespace, it's never been easier to set up a unique online storefront. Whether your services are physical, digital, or service-based, selling your wares has never been easier. Squarespace offers unmatched ability to showcase your unique wares with images, video, reviews, and add-ons, all capped off with their seamless checkout tools, letting your customers use whatever system they prefer, whether Klarna, ACH Direct Deposit, Apple Pay, Afterpay, or ClearPay. Squarespace offers a free trial for you to dip your feet into and test the waters, and ready to dive in headfirst, you can go to squarespace.com/EonsOfBattle or follow the link in the description below to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Games Workshop probably does make the best miniatures in the industry, but when it comes to the hobby side of their empire, they've always been a bit eh. Their paints they're good, they're fine, they're mostly fine. The contrast paints and washes are really expensive, and the base coats are also pretty expensive that you probably want to go with something else. And their tools are usually borderline functional and incredibly expensive. And they've added a new product to this lineup, the Games Workshop Paint Palette. It is wild. It is a silicone palette that is in the shape of a Servo-Skull, and they've used the kind of eccentricities in the Servo-Skull to make a lot of little voids and areas for you to put the paint in. And I'm in two minds about this because I think it's a really bad product, but if it was under $5, I think it'd be a great product. I think it's cute, I think it's on brand, silicone makes a lot of sense. It's not the perfect thing to paint on, but it definitely gets the job done. And if you paint a little bit here and there, like an hour or two in the evenings, I think a silicone dry palette makes a lot of sense. It is relatively easy to clean up. It'll probably will stain over time, and I think the Games Workshop palette is actually gray, so it'll probably stain a fair bit, especially if you use non-Games Workshop paints and inks and stuff. But if it was like $3, it's great. Go to town on that little thing. It would be awesome, but I'm sure it will not be $3. I'm sure it'll be really expensive. And if it's really expensive, then silicone is really dumb. The ridiculous shape of it isn't gonna fit nicely on your desk. The voids for paint to go in are all weirdly different sizes, which makes it really awkward to actually paint on it. If it was cheap, love it. If it's gonna be expensive, which it is, kinda hate it. And there's also it seems like Games Workshop is kind of trying to jump on the trends of people using those kind of fidget toy popper things to paint in. Those almost make more sense. And they're also pretty darn cheap. I think I saw some dinosaur ones that was $6 or $7, which is already really expensive because there's no way that product costs more than 3 or 4 cents to actually make. But at least you get it in the shape of a dinosaur, which is maybe a little bit cooler than a Servo-Skull. But also the little pops that you kind of make go in and out, they're really shallow little hemispheres. And so that actually lets your paint exist in a smaller amount of surface area. So it dries out just a little bit slower. It's a really bizarre design. It's a really weird thing for them to make. It is very cute that it's a Servo-Skull, but cute only gets you so far. And in my opinion, cute gets you $3 or $4. As soon as you get any more expensive than that, it stops being cute and it's weird or mean. I don't know if the cutesy wet palette is kind of designed for moms to buy it for their kids. It does make sense to have a spot to paint. When I first started painting way back in the day, I would put down like some newspaper, and I had the Games Workshop pots, and I would very poorly get the paint from the pots onto the actual figures. Also, pro tip for paint pots, I actually don't hate paint pots. I think they're fine as a paint transportation tool. The droppers are better, although droppers do have some flaws too. I really find it frustrating, especially with thicker paints like Army Painter paints or Vallejo paints, or especially if Games Workshop paints were actually in bottles. They're really, really thick, and so you kind of have to like shake them to get the paint to go into the applicator tip so that you can unscrew it and then goop it down. And then I am really messy and not careful at all. And so usually I'll kind of let the paint like splooge out the front, and then I just squish it down in the cap so that the cap just mushes all that wet paint into the cap, and all of my paints are really, really nasty. And honestly, my Games Workshop paint pots are in a little bit better shape. I don't use a lot of Games Workshop colors. I think the only one I still use religiously is Evil Sunz Scarlet because it's a really, really, really good, bright, saturated red. But pro tip, instead of dipping your bristles into the pot to get the paint out, which I think is the way that Games Workshop shows you how to do it in like their tutorial videos, just use the back of the paintbrush. You just put the back of the paintbrush in the paint, roll it onto your palette, and then just roll the excess onto like a paper towel. You'll lose like molecules of paint. It's way better than dipping your bristles into the paint. But speaking of bristles, like Games Workshop's hobby products are a little bit of a scam, but paint aimed at hobbyists is also a little bit of a scam. Like the incredible laundry list of colors is incredibly superfluous when the colors that matter are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and then everything else is just a little bit of a mix. And sometimes those mixes can be dangerous. I think in my painting career, I was in this weird middle area in my learning process where I didn't understand how colors worked, and so I would be using like a light desaturated green, and I would mix other colors into it, and it would just, the weirdest things would happen. Because inside of that color mix, there's like blue in it to desaturate it, and there's red in it to make it yellow. And so when I mix other colors into that, it would just turn into a nightmare. Now I typically use like really, really like saturated primary colors, and then I kind of edit it from there because they tend to be a little bit more stable when you're mixing. And with things like contrast paint is an amazing tool that has super upped the painting level of everybody, because like contrast paint will, like an average job contrast paint will look better than an average job of opaque colors. But not all contrast paints are created equal. And contrast paints and speed paints I'm using interchangeably. It's a little bit of a fib. Actually, it's kind of a lot of a fib. When all of these colors are called contrast, slap them over a white prime and they will look fantastic, because they won't. I would argue Games Workshop did a little bit of a better job of this when they used to have their washes, and then they had their inks, or they had their shade. No, shades is what they call their regular paints, which is not technically correct either. Games Workshop had their glazes, which are kind of these almost like neon transparent colors, essentially inks. Like if you buy artist inks, that's the kind of the same type of material that you're getting. But now those are rolled into the contrast paint and still called contrast paint. They're not contrast paint. The only paints that are contrast paint are the ones where you look at it and it's so incredibly dark, almost black. Those are the only colors that are truly going to be contrasty, where they are a very saturated color on the raised areas, and then they are a very, very dark wash, almost black in the recesses. Those are the ones that are gonna look good. If you buy like a pretty bright blue, it's gonna go on the model as a pretty bright blue, and it's not gonna do the contrast paint thing. It can still be an incredibly effective paint. They have like a jade color that is really phthalocyan green, and it's beautiful. It makes the most like gorgeous emerald glaze, but you have to know to use it that way, because if you just slapped it on a model, it's gonna look like a green mess. But if you glaze it over other colors to tint it and give it that kind of ethereal green magic to it, like it'll work really, really well. So I don't know, it's like Games Workshop products, it all kind of boils down to the experience of the user, and you do have to gain experience. Like I am really good with reds and yellows and a little bit of browns, but like I know nothing about blues and greens. And so I still struggle when I'm painting like blues and greens, because I just don't have as much experience behind me when I use those colors. So I don't know. All I know is that a Servo-Skull rubber wet palette is dumb. But speaking of dumb and Games Workshop irking me, They're coming to pre-order is the Warcry Sylvaneth team, which I was really excited about because I really want to get them, and I didn't want to buy them in the doubles box where they came with the Boner Boys because I didn't love the Boner Boys and I didn't want to spend a whole bunch of money just to get the one model I really want, which is the lady with the bees. But it's coming in at $62.50. Which is kind of the normal Games Workshop price. Games Workshop, why isn't this $80 like the new Kill Team Scouts? And I know why. It's because people don't like Age of Sigmar and the Sylvaneth as much as they need Space Marine Scouts for their armies. Games Workshop pricing. It is a mess, it is a nightmare, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. But speaking of things that don't make a lot of sense from Games Workshop, it is the month of October. I am feeling the call of the mighty Wah, and I was looking at the orcs because I need to do something with my orcs. I need to fill the board with greenskins. And one thing that seems right up my alley is the buggies. Did you guys know that Games Workshop came out with 5 orc buggies that are all unique? And so I made myself flashcards of the different buggies so I could finally learn what they are. I didn't even know there was 5. I was pretty sure there was 4 because 2 of them kind of blended together in my mind. And I had no idea what the rules were for any of them because I looked at them a little bit at the tail end of 9th edition and I haven't really been back to inspect them, but I super locked in on them. I figured out everything about their stats and it's really, really weird. All of the buggies share the same stat line, movement 12 inches, toughness 7 with a 4-up save, and a 6-up invulnerable save, which is kind of nice, although I don't love praying for 6s because they never come when you're praying for them. 9 wounds, leadership 7-up, and objective control 3. Objective control 3 is very nice because you can beat out like those lone operative objective control 2 characters that people love to leave in their backline. You just beat them out by 1, and you're kind of a tank. So you shouldn't do this, but you could tank shock for 1 CP, and it'd be really funny to like go after Space Marine players with their lieutenant with combi weapon, and you just drive your buggy directly into them and then roll 7 dice praying for 5s and 6s, and probably do a decent number of wounds, maybe pick them up in the fight phase, because you also are not awful in combat with 4 attacks, strength 7, wounding on 4s. I guess it's a little bit hard to aim a car and run somebody over. It's not as good as orcs are with their just natural fists, but AP -1 damage too. Like, not at all a bad stat line, but I almost would argue it's not a great stat line. It's very similar to an Imperial Guard Sentinel, but man, our Games Workshop got really creative with their abilities, and I almost wonder if they got a little bit too creative. The first buggy is the Shock Jump Dragsta. It has 1 hazardous shot at strength 8. It is 75 points. It has a hazardous gun that you're probably not gonna wanna shoot because you're an orc player, and so you're almost certainly gonna miss, and because it's hazardous and because it's me rolling the dice, I'm almost certainly gonna injure my own buggy. It has a really bizarrely amazing ability though in the movement phase. Instead of moving it, it's 12 inches. You can just pick it up and then put it anywhere on the board 9 inches away from enemy models. So it's kind of got a better version of uppy downy, where like the scouts have it, mandrakes have it for the Dark Eldar. It's really wickedly good. You might not do it all the time because your natural movement is 12, which is really good. And your natural movement would let you get within 9 inches of enemy models, which you sometimes need to get onto objectives. But for 75 points, like this is something that where I just don't know as much about the orcs as I know about Space Marines. Because if I was a Space Marine player, I would want this thing so bad. It would work amazingly in my lists because I use scouts for like late game objective grabbing and uppy downy. This would be so much better. But for orcs, they have Storm Boys, they have quite a few, like an orc army is way more units than a Space Marine army. So maybe they don't even need a model like this. I don't know, it is very interesting though. In my Space Marine brain, my Space Marine like knowledge makes me think, take this thing in a list, absolutely. Just hide it behind a building all game and then turn like 3 onwards, just drive it out and put it wherever I want on the board, probably on the objective that we've both nuked each other off of, and then it just sits there. It's kind of great, but I have no idea if it's good or not. Next up is the Custom Boosta Blasta. It has a orky version of a heavy stubba and a 6-inch heavy flamethrower. And it's 6 inches because Games Workshop's really cute and the flamethrower is just the exhaust of the engine. And so that's why it has a 6-inch range. So you'll probably never really get to shoot it unless you get into close combat. But all of these they don't come in squadrons anymore. You can only bring one of them. I guess you could charge with multiples at the same time, but it is a little bit awkward. And it suppresses models that it shoots at. So if you shoot and you're an orc, so you miss, but at least you hit. If you hit with like one attack, then that unit is suppressed. And so it subtracts from their movement characteristic. That's something. Is that 75 points is something? It's hard to say. These models exist in a really weird price point where they're a little more expensive than like Orc Boys or Gretchen, but they kind of don't do as much as like a more elite unit. I almost want to play a game. I think, because these things are fairly cheap, I think I could take all 15, 3 of each one, and play that in a game. And I would love to just to see what would happen. Next up is the Ruckatruck Squig Buggy. This might look like a car, but it is actually an indirect fire tank. It has a 36-inch indirect fire gun. It's like D6 plus 3 blast. Probably not gonna hit much, but it's not awful and could do some stuff. Like it could pick up if you're playing like an Eldar player and they're trying to do some shenanigans with the striking scorpions, or not striking scorpions, warp spiders. Warp spiders are really, really annoying. They like move 24 inches and then they have amazing flamethrowers, but they're really, really piddly, so they can be picked up by almost any type of like anti-infantry gunfire. This might be something worthwhile to have in a list. And if you shoot at a monster or a vehicle, you're not gonna do any damage, but you are gonna subtract 2 inches from its movement, which could matter a lot, but also monsters' vehicles typically have really good movement, so losing 2, it could make all the difference, or it could be completely superfluous. It just depends on what you're shooting at. It's really weird, and Games Workshop is really nervous about indirect fire, and so even though this gun isn't good and it's orc shooting, it's 100 points instead of 75 like the other buggies. So you're paying a pretty big tax to get that indirect fire. I do want to launch squigs over buildings into things. That does sound amazing, but I don't know if it's worthwhile. But speaking of worthwhile, the Megatrack Scrapjet, my personal favorite buggy. I think this thing looks amazing, and I love the idea of if a Daka jet crashes and the orc doesn't die, they just put wheels on what's left of the Daka jet, and now it's a car. That's an amazing bit of lore. It's really, really cool. It actually has a good amount of acceptable shooting. It deals mortal wounds, D3 mortal wounds when it charges. Like, it's not bad. It's probably a multi-melta. It is like the equivalent of a multi-melta if you math out its damage potential with a lower skew value, because it's flat damage 3 instead of D6. And it doesn't have the melta rule where you add in extra attacks if it's within a certain amount of range. So you're probably dealing like D3 mortal wounds plus 3 damage to anything. It's really, really weird. I kind of love it. I've actually played with this model in games before. It's okay. It doesn't do much. I don't know if you need it to do much. It's a sentinel, but it's sort of better than a sentinel. But it's not as good as like a truck full of boys or squig hog riders or flash gits. It might be better than flash gits. I don't know. Orcs are weird. And speaking of weird, the Boondaka Schnazwagon. This one probably has the best utility because it has an ability called Smokescreen, where if it's within 6 inches of enemy models, those enemy models have -1 to their shooting, which can be really, really good. It's not gonna have the most amazing survivability, but it could have enough. It could at least make it so that your opponent has to shoot down this thing, which is a vehicle, a light vehicle, but it still might take 1 or 2 things shooting to bring it down. And then before they can have their full ballistic skill back, it has 16 shots with its like super stubba, which is a good number of shots because it means that as an orc player, you're gonna get a couple of those turned into hits and then wounds. It's probably the best buggy. It's probably the most efficient buggy. It costs the same as the other ones, so it's definitely the most reasonable. Buggies are bizarre. Back in the day, it was very easy to look at a Games Workshop faction and kind of understand how you're meant to build it. And a lot of the factions were very much mirrors of each other, where everything had your infantry, your vehicle, which is a rhino, your special ability, your elite infantry, which are a little bit tougher than infantry and they have a better gun. You've got like your psychic hero, your normal hero, everyone's armies were a little bit the same, but now the Games Workshop has made so many more models. A lot of armies can have very, very unique play styles, especially like Space Marines, Orcs, and Tyranids have a lot of different ways you could skew your list to make a really unique army. And that is awesome, but it does make it really hard to build these armies because you have no idea what anything does and what pairs nicely with other things. Where if you're doing something like Leagues of Votann, World Eaters, or Dark Eldar, you don't have that many kits to pull from, and so you just have to make do with what you've got. The Orcs don't have to make do with what they've got because they've got everything. I really want to put together a list that is just so many buggies. I'll have to do it in TTS because I ain't spending like $1,000 to get all of these buggies just to try them out. But that's the magic of TTS, is that you get to just grab whatever you want and just try it out in a game. I would bet the Boondocka Schnazwacken reigns supreme, although there's something to be said for the Daka Jet, or the Scrap Jet, because number one, the model looks amazing and Rule of Cool reigns supreme, but also it does do mortals. And Orcs don't have an amazing way of doing mortals. I guess Beast Snagaboys can do like pseudo mortals and devastating wounds, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments below, what's the deal with the buggies? Why did Games Workshop make 5 of these things? Like, why? It doesn't make any sense. But you know what makes a ton of sense? Our website, EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch, like the new Nick and J dice. The J dice roll a little bit better, but the Nick dice are blue. There's something to that. And our website is the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members will get a credit that they can use towards our brand new terrain pack or any previous pack we have ever made. For the month of October, we have expanded on our Orc terrain with the Orc Rocket Factory. Fill your game boards with ramshackle walls and a grisly gate with an explosive flare. Man the battlements of an Orc weapons workshop absolutely dripping with bombs, rockets, and pointy missiles. This modular terrain is fully compatible with our previous Orc brewery and the Octeris terrain and can be assembled in all sorts of shapes ready to detonate at a moment's notice. Rereading the Orc Codex was step 1 of learning my way back into the Orcs in 10th edition. I think step 2 is going to be rewatching Mad Max Fury Road. And step 3, I don't know what step 3 is going to be yet, but it's either going to be getting way more Def Coptas or just doing something else completely bizarre and random, because that is truly the Orky way. Thanks for watching.